Um, you mentioned earlier that there's a country ruled by a kraken. Can,
Yeah.
can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Okay.
Welcome to the Character Sheet, comicbook.com's official home for all things fantasy and tabletop. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. I am joined by James Case, who is here to talk to us about an upcoming Pathfinder product, the Tian Xia World Guide. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Hi, everyone. I'm James Case. I'm senior designer at Paizo, and I'm one of the project leads on the Tian Xia World Guide.
And so I guess the easiest question is, what is the Tian Xia World Guide?
Yeah, so the Tian Xia World Guide is one of our upcoming Lost Omens books, which focus on the setting and the world lore of, the Age of Lost Omens, the Pathfinder setting, the world of Golarion. Tian Xia is the portion of our setting that takes a lot of inspiration from Asian folklore and fantasy. So this is a large continent. It's a little farther away from the Inner Sea region, and it has really takes from a very broad spectrum of Asian fantasy, both kind of geographically. There's some stuff that's a little more Japanese. There's some stuff that's very Southeastern. And there's some stuff that's just kind of fantasy first. Themes like the nation that is run by a kraken. Yeah,
Well, what
happens. As well as kind of looking at a very broad in time as well. So for this book, it's a very big, expansive look into the region. We had a huge roster of freelance authors come in and contribute to it, and just going through and kind of taking a really deep look at each of the different nations in this continent, basically.
So back in 2019, when Pathfinder 2nd Edition launched, Paizo could have opted to revisit familiar locales. And, if you haven't, if you're not familiar with Paizo's line of Pathfinder books, they released a pretty steady stream of campaign setting guides in addition to the adventure paths, which are, all fantastic. But, when second edition launched, you guys chose to expand the world with the first the Mwangi Expanse and now this world guide. So what went into that decision to kind of not focus on the familiar and instead expand the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think first when we were sort of doing the update into second edition, we of course, the Inner Sea is where the majority of our stories have taken place. We want to update the canon. One of the really cool things about Golarion is that the world does evolve sort of in real time. So it's been about 10 years in the real world, so about 10 years have gone by in Golarion. It's why characters like Yoon, she was the kineticist in the first edition, and she was maybe about 8, 9, 10, and now she's about 18 to 20 in second edition, just because she's gone along with the timeline. So we wanted to look at those locations, but also, the Golarion has never just been the Inner Sea region. There's been other continents the whole time. We had books like Dragon Empire in the first edition. We had some looks into Arcadia, even as early as first edition. But certainly, as we've gone into second edition, we've both wanted to look at familiar fantasy tropes, but also a very globally diverse view of mythology. There's a lot of cool mythology that we've invented for Golarion. A lot of it is taken from this sort of more classical medieval, European setting, but we also have places like the land of Shenmen, which is run by Joraguma, which are, shape-shifting spider creatures and that sort of thing. So we really wanted to take this look into Tian Xia and really get, a lot of inspiration from the source mythology and also put that Pathfinder twist on it.
So when you decided that you wanted to do Tian Xia, one of the flaws of past attempts to look at culture, to create fictional cultures based on Asian-inspired, mythology, Asian-inspired cultures, is that they kind of homogenize it into one or two places, and basically take the largest continent in the world and turn it into one homogenous culture. So how did you avoid that trap, and how did you go about building this very diverse region?
Yeah, I mean, We definitely get that. This is a project that myself and Eleanor Farron, who's the one of the co-leads on this project, you might know her from a lot of her work in the Lost Omens line, have wanted to do for a long time. We're both part Asian. She has a formal degree in this. I spent most of my 20s living in Asia, and we have a lot of talent in our pool that comes from that part of the world, or is like or our second generation or third generation diaspora. But for this book, just because it's such a large book and there's a character guide as well, we really wanted to spread out. So there's about 40 authors on this book. I think almost virtually all of them are either of Asian descent or living in places in Asia, which made coordination with the time zones quite difficult sometimes. But we wanted to be sure we were getting people who weren't like just in the Seattle area, even within that experience. So there's people here, there's people who are writing in from the UK, there's people who are writing in from Singapore, Southeast Asia, and areas like that. And kind of everybody had a very different view of it. There were certainly some commonalities that came up in the writing, of course, but the continent, both in the real world and in Galarian, has very different areas. So one nation is very high energy. That's like Quain is very it's very like your wuxia, your stereotypical kung fu place that you might think of, but it also it has this like really great look into sort of what are the politics like in a region where these immortal grandmasters kind of are the biggest force there. We just had a fiction come out this week in that area that I think is really cool. And we also have some other areas that are more for political intrigue, or more for kind of monster hunting, or more for just adventuring. So we really kind of wanted to make sure that the theme, both in terms of the kind of what is the main fantasy kind of conceit of this area, what's the high concept, but also like what kind of adventures can you have there, we're pretty spread out. And with about 40 authors, we were pretty sure we got a very wide range of ideas.
I have to ask, how do you coordinate so many freelancers? Because that's one of the most impressive things about these Pathfinder books is some of them you have this list of just powerhouses, and it's there's dozens of them. How do you manage that?
I write a lot of emails. We have a Discord server, but also for what it's worth, this is maybe not a project. This undertaking is maybe not something we would have done in our first year. We've been lucky to have the time to sort of grow our author lists, and a lot of the times when we offered a section to somebody, they would say, hey, this is cool, this is a little more work, but I would like to recommend this, a little more work than I can take on right now. Could I maybe take one of these sections? And I've worked with these people in the industry before. How would you think? And of course we looked at their histories and got writing samples just to make sure that the tone and everything was kind of what we were looking for. But we're lucky in that this is an industry where we can see each other's work all the time. And there's some people on this list who we've been working with for years, who have been writing for Paizo longer than I've been employed at Paizo, frankly. And there's some people who I was like, well, this is that we want to reach out now. This is the project where you might, we just want to see who's available, see who can make introductions. So I mean, I'm not going to say it wasn't logistically complex, but I think it was definitely worth it. And I think that's something you'll see a lot in the final project.
So let's dive a little bit into the world guide itself. Who or what are some the dominant powers of the continent?
Yeah, so this is a large continent, and there's definitely a lot of regions here. There are some kind of the big areas we've taken a little bit of a look at already. One is Goka. Goka is the largest city on the continent. You might recognize it from the Fist of the Ruby Phoenix adventure path that we had a couple years ago. It is to Tian Xia what something like Absalom is to the Inner Sea region. It is your large metropolis, can find everything there region. It's located on the west. It has maybe notes of Hong Kong or Singapore, maybe areas like that where there are regions in Tian Xia that are a little more culturally specific. You know, Minkai is very inspired by Japan, for instance, but Goka kind of intentionally takes, you know, there's, you know, there are Chinese words next to, you know, Korean words next to, I think kopitiams are like a big thing there, you know, the sort of coffee house you would see in Southeast Asia as meeting places. So it is recovering from the events of Fist of the Ruby Phoenix, which I don't want to spoil, but the town does get a little leveled at some point. So so, you know, one of the things we have here, back to that living canon, it's, you know, there's a lot of construction going on. People are rebuilding. You have things like the leader of the city basically trying to juggle these two parliaments in government to sort of repair the damages done. And it sees the return of the sorceress Hao Jin, which is, she's a long-standing figure in the sort of Pathfinder universe. She's an immortal sorceress and is kind of in some ways the patron of the city, who was absent for a long time and now is back. So one of the many ways in which that sort of has evolved with our adventure paths and that sort of thing.
Another character that I have to bring up is, you know, somebody who dates back to literally the first Pathfinder adventure.
Yeah,
and, that's Ameiko, who is still the Empress of I'm blanking on the country.
Minkai.
Yeah. So how's she doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, Ameiko goes way back in the setting, and of course, through the events of the Jade Regent adventure path in first edition, she's now Empress. There's this really good, she's settling into the role a lot, but this has brought with it a lot of change, and where Minkai was kind of, it was always a very Japan-inspired nation, but in the second edition, we're looking at this very much in sort of like taking inspiration from like the Meiji Restoration, or periods of history where there's kind of a large influx of foreign culture and influence. This is also coming with, of course, Ameiko has kind of looked at the samurai class as sort of allowing the rise of the Jade region and is moving to sort of disrupt their power a little bit. So you're seeing this very kind of upset in the traditional structures there. I think we have a really nice art of her in kind of a very traditional kind of like court dress in her like sort of full Empress regalia, but she's still an adventurer. So it's noted that like she doesn't make people come to her. She like goes on all of diplomatic missions to sort of curry favor, but also kind of because she misses being out on the road and adventuring a little bit. You know, and of course, anytime you're breaking up the power structures of the people who ran the country for a long time, you might have some internal threats. So, you know, she has some tricky balancing to do in, I think it is called the Ondori era, which refers to roosters, because of course, Shizuru is one of the main deities of the setting. She's sort of the patron of samurai and somebody very associated with the sun. So of course, roosters herald the sun, and that's kind of become the era name for Ameiko's rule now.
You mentioned earlier that there's a country ruled by a kraken. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, we've touched on it a little bit in the past. The nation of Wansho was a nation that was plagued by war during the collapse of sort of the previous continent-wide empire, the Longhua Empire. And they were saved from a bevy of storms and natural disasters that destroyed their ecosystem by their divine saviors, Xanagor and Elder Kraken, who totally did not also use his powerful storm magic to cause all of the storms that he then saved the nation from. So that is, it's a little bit up in the north there. That is a nation run by a bunch of propaganda and mind control. It is very much, you know, as much as we have heroic nations where there are places you can go, heroes come from there, you know, we also have nations in Tian Xia that are not doing so well, you know, infested by monsters or kind of, you know, ruled by evil rulers, that sort of thing. So we wanted to be sure that, like, as much as we want to show a really vibrant and fun view of Asian fantasy, there's also still, you know, Lands run by ghosts. Lands Oni, a forest that has a bunch of kaiju in it. There's certainly regions that have a lot of adventure and a lot of cleaning up to do there.
One of the things that I love about Pathfinder and I love about Galarian is that there's always seems to be more secrets to discover about the world. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask, what are some of the big mysteries and secrets that we delve into with this book?
What are some of them? Okay. There is one nation that has a succession crisis going on between the emperor and his many sort of his many children and that sort of thing. Unknown to any of them, his soul has been transferred into a construct that he is sort of waiting the succession crisis out for. That's one of my favorite. That's a good one. We take a look into the Valash Raj for the first time here, which is a nation in the middle of the Valashmite jungle. You might think it's hard to have a nation when you are in a giant kaiju-infested jungle, but it turns out that they've been living there for quite some time. They have specialized professions like kaiju callers that exist to sort of route the kaiju around the major city centers and that sort of thing. We still have the Darklands and the caverns of haunted clockworks below it. So this is a large book, but there were a lot of areas that we wanted to leave on the map sort of as lingering mysteries.
Another cool thing that I absolutely love about Pathfinder is that, especially with second edition, it seems like the game has really embraced the eccentric in fantasy. Like you can just play as literally anything you can think of, and it's just absolutely a blast. What are some of the really wild and unexpected things that we'll see in this book?
Let me see.
I know, I'm just asking you.
I know.
All the cool stuff.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I think is really fun is the way in which you might see a very conventional experience of Asian culture in an event. Things like New Year's festival, things like lion dancing, things like bubble tea, that sort of stuff. That's construction, family, all that stuff, and how it's just kind of seen through the lens of the fantasy here. There's a nation called Linvar, which has ties to Taldor. It used to be a Manadar in the previous edition. This is a Taldan colony, and of course, Taldor has the Groggersent lion. It's this large heraldic, very very European lion. So they do lion dances in Linvar, but they're all with this like six-eyed Groggersent lion on them, and it's just like it's this really cool mix of a lion dance, something you'd really think of with this sort of like, but what if it was the giant immortal six-eyed heraldic lion? Even the cover of the book depicts a dragon boat race, very common. You see them around, but it's within also an actual dragon is taking part in the race. Dragons are very common in this area. We have the nation of Zahoy and Tangmai in the sort of southeast are both so high magic. We have a very cute art of a school for young sorcerers in Tangmai because this is a nation that has just a lot of sorcery in it. And so this is a place where you have your little school for all of your, kids to learn how to harness their magic powers, which will be the focus of one of our fictions upcoming. So I just think it's fun. It's fun to take that sort of fantasy lens and look through it. Like Goka has a lot of construction going on. It has construction going on because it got attacked by a kaiju. It has Basher arcades, which are essentially they're a place where students go to slack off, where they play what is essentially a magical version of arcade games. There's a lot of betting on it, that sort of thing. And it may or may not be run by former gangsters who are trying to go legit. So I don't know. There's a lot. It's hard to pick one.
So you've brought up kaiju multiple times. So I have to ask, as part of this, there's multiple books that are coming out here involving Tian Xia. Are we going to get some kaiju stat blocks?
you don't get kaiju stat blocks. We've depicted kaiju before. Monsters of Myth had a great section on them. Kaiju are beyond your ability to engage with directly. A kaiju stat block doesn't show you how many hit points it has. It has hazards like roaring breath or tail that knocks over a building that you just have to negotiate around. Think when you engage a kaiju, it's less about fighting them directly and more about finding what is possible to sort of redirect them or drive them off. King Mogaru, who's kind of our most, I think, prevalent kaiju, has a very is a powerful destructive force of nature, but also has a predilection for song and can in some ways be directed or called to a place by sufficiently beautiful music. So I don't think you'll be fighting one directly, but you'll certainly have those stories.
So since I have to ask, is this might be more of a Starfinder thing, but with kaiju, obviously you have like mechas and mech robots, and for every Godzilla there has to be Mecha Godzilla. Do we see any of that in here?
That's probably a little more Starfinder, but there are a fair number of constructs, clockworks, and otherwise in this book. We have, in addition to all of the lore sections, we also have a bestiary at the back that touches on, some additional monsters in addition to the ones we've published in other books that might be appropriate here. And there's certainly some kind of magical clockworks in them that are fun, but I don't think anything that's quite the size of a kaiju. Okay.
I just wanted to know if I could get a Megazord or something going. Last question. When it comes to fantasy tabletop RPGs, a lot of people opt to build their own worlds when playing. So what's the draw for them, or maybe even someone who's never played Pathfinder, to buy this world guide?
Yeah. So, I mean, to some extent, everybody, when you play a game, you always want to inject something of yourself in it, right? And I think this book, even if you don't play Pathfinder, I think is just a really cool look at a lot of Asian-inspired fantasy made by some of the best writers in the industry. If you look at something like if you look at something like the wars that are going on in Xidao underwater, maybe you don't have exactly that nation, but maybe you want to do something aquatic in your world, and you can look at sort of the oceans of Tian Xia area and the sort of hazards and adventure hooks in there. You can port them into your world. You might be able to look at some of the monsters in the bestiary and look at one of my favorites is the Yongno, which is a folkloric Korean creature that eats 100 corrupt aristocrats to return to heaven. Even if you're not playing Pathfinder, if you want an example of a Korean inspired monster that you might, adjust to your own world or your game, you could take that and put it in. Similarly with the deities. So I think that, even if you're not taking the entire continent and just playing in it, there's certainly there's so many examples of great, an NPC and their adventure hooks, or this town here with this cool conceit that you might, put into your world like that.
Hey, fantastic. Well, really obvious question. When does the World Guide come out?
Yeah, so this is coming out in April. So we're coming up on it right now.
Wow.
And then the character guide will be coming out in August. So look forward to those.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute blast. Be sure to pre-order the Tian Xia World Guide, and be sure to check out the character guide too. And go to Paizo's website, because, as mentioned, there's a lot of fiction and there's a lot of blog posts, talking up about some of the many things that you can find not only in Tian Xia but in the wider world of Pathfinder and Starfinder too. Anyways, that's all that we have today. Thanks again for coming on, James.
Thanks for having me.